another episode of People, Place, and Purpose, the show where we hear stories from business owners, creators, and entrepreneurs about how they got started, what they love most, what challenges them, where they've had to pivot, learn, change, how relationships and networking have helped along the way, and ultimately, how they turn their passion into a successful venture and are living a life they love. I'm your host, Kate Lusko. I love to travel, eat delicious food, and meet and get to know cool people, and I'm so glad you're here today. Let's jump in. Krysta Lewis is a licensed esthetician, certified makeup artist, and the founder and CEO of Aisling Organics. After suffering health issues caused by her makeup, at 21 years old, Krysta dove headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship and started Aisling, focused on clean, organic products with botanically based ingredients. Her dedication not just to the world of clean beauty products, but also to startups, female founders and business owners, expanding access to capital, and paying forward all that she has learned thus far is abundantly clear in my conversation with Krysta. With that, let's get to today's episode. Well, welcome, Krysta. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing today?
Doing well. So glad to see you. Excited to hear more about your story. So to start us off, I always love folks to give a little bit of your background. So where you're from, what you did before doing what you do now, and then we'll sort of launch into today.
Sure. It's one of the things I like to talk about most. So I grew up in the beauty industry. My family owned the largest beauty supply distributor on the East Coast, which ended up getting acquired by L'Oreal in 2010. And so I grew up in business meetings, at hair shows, everything across the board when it came to beauty. But I thought that I was going to college for broadcast journalism. And while makeup was always a big passion of mine, it was not something that I was going to be pursuing full time until leading up to college. And a few years while there, I had pretty significant migraines and nausea. And being outside Boston, we have access to the best healthcare. And I truly thought that someone could find a solution for me. But when that didn't happen, I had to take it into my own hands. And a few years down the line, I ended up finding out it was my makeup, of all things, that was causing those symptoms, which is very ironic considering beauty products was what gave my family a living. And so now all of a sudden to be having this trade-off with them was very difficult. And so at that time, I had just graduated college a few years early. And I thought to myself, well, my friends won't be graduating for a little while and can't be more broke than I already am. So why not just give it a try and try to launch an organic line that was truly high performance, but also very pure, because in 2016, the only options were what you buy at Whole Foods, and nothing to knock those options. But as a makeup artist and an esthetician myself, I'm really looking for products that work, because my whole thought process is you can tell someone their product is hurting them. I mean, not in those words, but if you can't find a replacement that makes them feel the same and look the same, they won't switch long-term. It's going to be like a yo-yo diet. And so that's all what really inspired us to launch Aisling, because we believe that women and men too shouldn't have to sacrifice health for beauty or beauty for health.
And so I'm curious, back when you thought you wanted to go into broadcast journalism, was it almost like because you had been around makeup and the beauty industry and all of that for so long, it was almost like, I am definitely not doing, right? Like people who grew up in a certain state oftentimes will say, the first thing I'm doing is getting as far away from here as possible. Was it sort of, were you really passionate about that? Or was it a little bit of, I just don't want to do what I've been surrounded by, at least initially?
Sure. So at that time, I thought I loved broadcast journalism, but what I ended up realizing is that I love public speaking. And they're very, very different things. Writing full time as a journalist is different than being able to get on stage and speak about, anything that you're passionate about. And what's really ironic is I was going to do the whole, finish my degree, move out to California, try to get on, a show as a host or whatever the case may be. And, the likelihood of that is fairly slim. And that's not to say I couldn't do it. It's just saying it's a very challenging channel that I could have gone down. And instead, now, a few years into owning Aisling, I travel all across the US all year long public speaking. And so I actually public speak more now than I probably would have if I went down that original path.
Yeah, that's great. And it's fun to sort of recognize that you can incorporate some of those pieces of other things into what you're doing, right? I mean, even people who have done a couple of different careers, it can be valuable to sort of step back and think about, okay, what were the pieces that I loved, right? Outside of the jobs or the organizations or whatever it might have been. So that's really great that you found a way to do that. So back when, fresh out of college, very kind of personal driver to start this, how did you actually start? Like, what were some of those first steps you took to figure out how you were going to create this?
I think the beauty in the situation, pun intended there, is that I was naive enough to not think that it would be hard. And of course, running a business is one of the most challenging things you probably ever do. But I wasn't stopped by that fear, which tends to stop so many of us. And so my thought process was, if I just do enough research, if I find the right people, there's no reason that this shouldn't work. I also had great examples considering both of my parents' own businesses growing up. And so I kind of knew no different than to just make things happen and kind of go out on a limb. And so I started with just doing a lot of research with good old Google. I know that sounds funny, but it really was as simple as that. And I looked up cosmetic manufacturing. And I ended up figuring out that a lot of times people go to a contract manufacturer to have them do the development work for your products. And so that's probably where I differ from a lot of, let's say, my competitors, because I am truly a businesswoman at heart with a passion when it comes to organic makeup, but I'm not like an in-home creator. I'm not someone who sits in their kitchen, mixing vats of skincare. And I truly do envy those people who do resonate with that path so well. But for me, it was, who can I find that's the best business partner that can really help me scale this business?
Interesting. So surrounding yourself with sort of the experts in a variety of areas.
Exactly.
Okay. And so what were your first products?
My first products was our foundation, our concealer, mascara, eyeliner, and cheek tints. And what I will say about this, because I think there's a great lesson behind what I did, is it's very easy when starting a product line to listen to your customers get so excited about what you created and want more and more and more from you. And what happened is, before I knew it, I was launching products every couple months. And what I wasn't really thinking about is, how realistic is this to properly capitalize all these new product launches? And if you have all these product launches, can you properly advertise them as you need to, when you are spreading your time and your resources so thin for every single individual product? And so if I were to do anything over, it would probably be to start with one core product versus starting with 5, and really push the success of that before launching anything else. And even more importantly, I would have built an audience before I launched a product. And this is something that not a lot of us think a lot about. We get so excited about launching something that we go 0 to 100 and launch as quick as we can. But what we don't realize, as soon as we launch a product, the audience that we are launching to already has a sales pressure associated with it. Because at the end of the day, they think that you want them to buy, which is correct. You do want them to buy. And so nowadays, with TikTok and Facebook groups and all these great ways to build a community, if I were to do it over again, I would have built this community, spent like a year, 2 years building a community, and then launched a product. It would have been much easier to boost us off the ground.
And so what would you have built that community around? Like, if not the product, what might that have looked like?
Sure. So one, I am very prominent as the face of my brand. So it could easily have been just me sharing makeup tips to people who don't know how to do their makeup. It could be teaching people how to live a more sustainable life with switching out their products. I mean, there's so many different ways to do it. Makeup, I mean, of course, there's many avenues that you could take. But for instance, let's say you were developing a product for earaches, something incredibly random, but it still works for this. In my example, you could create a Facebook group around like natural ways to treat ear infections or how to deal with chronic ear infections. And before you know it, you have a good community of people who are very interested in what you have to say. And not only that, but as you're creating, let's say, this ear product, you can continue to get feedback from this group. And so they not only start with being a supporter, but then they can go through that journey with you, give you validation and feedback before you launch that product. And then when you do launch, they're probably your first customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, how do you, I would imagine you look for feedback now, right? As much as I know there's always that adage about, be careful what you ask for, right? That if you ask for things, to some extent, you have to be prepared to, take that feedback and whatever you choose to do with it. But how do you get feedback now?
We look for feedback in so many different ways, being a direct to consumer line. We're getting ready to launch in retail, but for most of our lifespan, we've just been an online only site. And the beauty in that is that we truly get to know our customers. And so whether it's emails, which a lot of times I answer our customer service emails because I really like to know the pain points that our customers are having. So it's either there, we have a VIP Facebook group. So a lot of times our customers are sharing feedback with us there. And then we have post-purchase surveys that essentially lets that consumer tell us a little bit more about what they want from us, where they heard about us, like all that fun stuff. And so we take this feedback really seriously. And to do so, you have to have actions associated with it. And so a great example is we had a foundation formula that we had to then reverse engineer because we had to move to a different lab. And so we reverse engineered this foundation, which basically just means that you try to recreate an old product. Mm-hmm. And when we launched the second one, we didn't hit it spot on with the smell. And while we didn't add any crazy scents to it, the natural ingredients combined just gave a interesting smell, to say the least. And while I didn't think personally that it would be a big deal, we had a decent amount of customers that said that they hated the smell and they couldn't use it because of the smell, which is then ironic because then we have a handful of customers that love the smell so much they raved about it. And so you really can't please everyone, but our best bet in that situation was just to make it scentless, primarily because we also have customers that are nervous about scents, even if they are natural scents. And so we ended up making that change, and our customers were thrilled that we actually heard them and we applied that feedback. And so if you are going to say that you listen to your customers, you need to make sure that you're continuing to follow through with the suggestions that they give you, or else they won't continue to feel heard or supported.
And it's so interesting. I bought some crackers recently that I've bought many times before, but these are different. Like something about them, the color of them is a little bit different, and the flavor is definitely just subtly, I don't like them as much. I don't know why they're different, but it's just funny how it's sort of like if the flavor had been slightly different and I liked it, well, then that's great. But the fact that it's slightly different is like, well, I don't know if I'm going to get them again because it was just off. I would imagine, right, there's just sort of, to your point, you can't please everybody necessarily, but people get attached to things and people have expectations. And is with a product or with multiple products like this, I'm sure consistency makes a difference, but is consistency easy to achieve?
For a while, I thought consistency was, but we were at a small scale. So of course, it's much easier to maintain then. But once you start really ramping up production, thankfully, we have very professional manufacturers. So they're made to scale, but there is always these times in which a batch might not be as consistent as it normally is. And we'll have to go back and say, hey, something went wrong here. How do we change this moving forward? And so we're always tweaking our products regardless. And so we're keeping a good eye on whether that happens or not. But the most common use case where you see change is usually when a product company has been acquired, because whomever acquires the company is trying to make changes that is more profitable for them. And sometimes that means using different ingredients. Sometimes it means taking shortcuts. You never really know, but if you start with an indie brand all the way up to post-acquisition, you'll see usually that some things do change, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worst.
Right. And I'm sure depending upon who you ask.
Exactly.
So you mentioned in there your team. What does your team look like, and how did you build that from when, it was just you researching on Google?
So managing people has been by far the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's very funny because when I first started, I thought raising capital would be hard. I thought creating really good products was going to be the hardest part, but I never thought as a people person that managing people would be very hard.
Mhm.
But what you deal with is people of all different age groups. We were an all female team at one point. And so it's an interesting dynamic. And as someone who is always trying to do what's best for the people around me, it made me at times have to make some very hard decisions that didn't necessarily benefit the company, but it benefited the people. And so it taught me a lot that I need to be very careful about who I hire, especially if it's people that are very close to me, because my judgment can be clouded when that's the case. And so that's the biggest lesson that I've learned throughout the years. And I have ended up, because of that, being a huge fan of contractors because it's very straightforward. You don't really deal with the management side of things when you are working with contractors, and it's very goal and result oriented. And so that tends to be my preference at this point.
And so, what about culture? Have you, in this process of hiring people and managing people and, tweaking things along the way, have you had to kind of create an internal company culture?
Absolutely. Culture is something that's really happening whether you want it to or not, positive or negative. And one thing that I think that I've done right as a leader is making sure that the culture of our company is fun. It's a balance between working hard and having a very whole rounded life, because at times when I didn't have my health, I realized what it's like to not have that type of balance in your life. So I'm always promoting work-life balance. But most of all, it's making sure that my employees feel like they're heard. That's very, very important, and I don't see it enough. And so I do that through consistent reviews, making sure that I'm communicating well with my people, and making sure that we're also talking about their aspirations, because yes, they are doing a lot for me by working for me, but also I want to do a lot to give back to them, which brings up a great example. We're still a smaller company, but we invest heavily in our internship program, which you don't always see from smaller companies. And what I've realized is that if you can work with someone and help them understand their life path and what their passions are, that's one of the most rewarding things that you can do as a business owner. And so whether that's employees who you coach from intern all the way up to moving on to a dream position that may not be with us, or whether it's our interns just leaving our programs and feeling like, hey, I actually know what I want to do now, couldn't be better in my eyes.
And there's something really gratifying about being able to be a mentor, right? So I'm sure your employees feel that towards the interns, but there's this whole concept of reverse mentorship and what, younger generations can introduce people to who have been doing it for longer, new ideas that can be brought into an organization. Like I always love to think about the reverse of something like that because I think traditionally we just think about, what can we teach them as opposed to what can they teach us?
Absolutely. And a lot of times they can teach us much more than we ever anticipated, even with a smaller age gap, such as I'm a millennial and I have interns that are Gen Z. There's not a huge age gap there, but they're still teaching me a lot, even though I still feel so young.
So you do a lot to give back as well. I noticed that you donate a portion of your proceeds and you are involved in a couple of outside organizations. Can you talk about what all of that looks like?
Yes, giving back is very important to us. I've always felt that if you're able to be selling goods to the public, you also need to be able to give back to those same people. And the way that I thought that it would provide the most impact was to partner up with this organization called Lipstick Angels. And Lipstick Angels provides beauty products to cancer patients and assembles these glam days to help them feel beautiful inside out and outside in. Of course, they already are without makeup, but just having a spa day per se tends to really uplift spirits and confidence. And so I felt that that was so appropriate because our makeup line is not contributing to cancer in any way. And in fact, because it's botanically based, it would do quite the opposite in terms of being more healthy for the skin. And so it seemed like a perfect collaboration from the get-go, and we've been a big supporter of them.
And so when you're not leading this company and traveling around the country public speaking, what do you do for fun? How do you maintain a work-life balance, especially when, you sort of were thrown into this at such a young age and have scaled it so much?
That's a really good question, and one that I laughed at for a while because I've always felt that I could answer these hard questions in investor meetings. And then all of a sudden, someone asked me what I do for fun, and I don't have answers. So I've definitely been working on figuring out what I do like to do for fun because I do love my business so much that it becomes a big part of my day. But just as you said, it's really important to balance out your life, especially with all the hardships that the world is going through right now. It's a lot between business and just keeping up with the world. And so I would say that the biggest one for me is probably kickboxing. I do that a few nights a week, and I'm surrounded by a really good group of people. And so seeing people and exercising is always great. And then comedy. I love comedy shows. I have always thought that maybe I would take some stand up comedy classes just to push myself
Fun.
outside of my boundaries and really try something new. But those would probably be my two biggest ones.
Do you have favorite stand-up comedians?
I love Tom Segura. I actually just saw him a few weeks ago, so he's great. Bill Burr is also great. I mean, there's so many good ones, but those would probably be my top ones.
Yeah, and it's nice that stuff like that is coming back, right? That sort of, as life settles down a little bit, we're seeing more events in person. It's fun to. I have tickets for a couple of concerts, right? It feels invigorating to be able to get back out and do those things again.
It really does, and I think people need it more than they know that they need it.
So when you think back, you've mentioned a couple of different things, if you had them to do over again. Curious about the challenges because I think sometimes, there can be this envy of like, wow, someone's doing something they love and they took the risk and it turned out well for them. But certainly, there's underlying pieces that are really hard along the way. What have been some of those challenges for you?
There are so many challenges. Just as you mentioned, I think that's one of the hardest realities going from looking outside at a business versus being in it yourself is that it is going to be an intense roller coaster. And you really need to be okay with the highs and the lows. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for mental health for entrepreneurs. Eventually, I hope as I will be an investor to really talk about these things like, hey, are you meeting with a therapist? Are you seeing your doctor on a routinely basis? What are you doing to balance out the stress that comes your way? Because our culture is toxic in an extent that busyness and constantly going is rewarded, but no one is rewarding the person who's taking a break and balancing their life in addition to that, because founder burnout is a huge deal. It really is, especially coming out hopefully of a pandemic. And so that's one thing that I'm always trying to find better balance with, because when those lows hit, sometimes it can feel like the world is coming down, especially if they're financial. And as a small business, you go through periods of time where you have plenty of funding and you see that there's a beautiful runway in front of you and you can afford to pay payroll. And then there's times where it's like, oh my gosh, we don't have any capital left. How will I pay my employees the next week? And as I mentioned earlier, if they're people who are really close to you, that makes it even trickier. And so how do you navigate all of these things? And I think that really comes down to working on your own mental health and finding things that bring you happiness and finding things that shut your mind off, whether that's going for a walk on a beautiful day if you're in New England like today, or just embracing meditation or yoga. I know we hear this all the time, and I'm my own biggest roadblock when it comes to those two things, but those help a lot of people. And so again, just remembering that it's very hard. So find your tools that you can pull out when you go through those hardships.
Yeah, one of my recent guests talked about how when she was growing her business, she almost didn't realize until, not it was too late, but until it was pretty far along, how much it had become her identity. And she sort of, found herself thinking, like, who am I if I don't have this business? And I think our culture sort of, it's one of the first things we ask people when we meet them. What do you do? Right? It's sort of our culture is very intertwined with what it is that we do professionally. But it sounds like you're aware of that, at least to try and help, keep that from happening down the road.
I'm absolutely aware of it. Doesn't make it any easier, especially with social media. I really, really encourage people to get off social media if you're a founder. Like, really, like, don't embrace yourself in it every day because as a founder, you tend to follow other founders. And then what you see is people celebrating only their wins and not their losses. And before you know it, you feel like you're not doing as well as other people around you are doing. And that's just not the case. Everyone's just showing their highlight reels. I know we talk about this all the time as society, but it's very important to disengage from that because it truly has a strong link to your happiness and your optimism when it comes to moving forward. And so it's challenging enough. We don't need any of those things, that's for sure.
Yeah, so interesting. So what about, what are your hopes and dreams for this? You talked about your parents' business was acquired by L'Oreal. Like, do you hope to be acquired and, do something else? Are there parts of the world that you haven't yet embarked on that you're hoping to expand into? I'm just curious, where do you want this to go?
Absolutely. It's a question that I think a lot about. Of course, my main objective with Aisling has always been to provide healthier options to people who want them. And so as widespread as that can be is going to be really important and as accessible as it can be. And so for right now, I think that we're doing a great job expanding, especially as we're about to go into retail, to make sure that that presence is there and that we're constantly work on educating that consumer. But eventually I do hope to be acquired primarily because of the fact that I think that the larger companies that can acquire a company like mine have a wider reach when it comes to selling internationally and resources that we don't currently have. And so I do think there's going to come a point where it's going to be better to have more hands on deck and a better infrastructure to be able to expand the company. And so that's certainly a hope of mine. I truly believe I'm a serial entrepreneur at heart. I love the challenge of building a business. As I mentioned earlier, business is truly my core passion. And so my hope is to eventually start over again and rebuild a business and see what that looks like. And then eventually after that, the end goal, which is probably the most arguably important out of them all, is to invest in other female businesses because I know how challenging it is to be especially young female entrepreneur and be trying to raise money where VC capital only goes to about 2% of women. I mean, never mind you add other demographics into the mix. And so that's really, really important to me that there's more access for capital, but also more VCs who have been through the path that I've been on. Because I think it's easy for someone who's never had a startup to critique a startup. And it's definitely more impactful when the person who is investing in your company says, look, I've been there too. And then to be able to add mental health, options and really help people with that on top of it, I think is going to be a really great combination.
It reminds me a little bit of, being in college, and certainly not to knock the professors who are academics, if you will, but I always found, especially in the business world, that it was so beneficial to have professors who were in the business world, right? Maybe now they're just teaching, but they had that real life experience. It just added so much, I don't know, value and context to what it was that we were, whatever it was that we were talking about. Similar sort of, I've been there, this is real and not just something that, I've heard about or read on the piece of paper.
Absolutely. It's so important. And getting back to that mental health part, everyone has challenges mentally, of course. That's just a part of being a human. But if you can truly relate to the struggles that an entrepreneur goes through with that roller coaster, considering you've been on that path, I think it's more relatable. I think you can find better resources for the people that you're helping and so forth.
So, can you share with us the retail where folks will be able to find you eventually?
Unfortunately, it's not solidified yet, so I can't. But hopefully, in the near future, I will be able to. What I will say is a recent win for us that's been pretty exciting is we're doing a collaboration with FabFitFun, and we're a part of their spring sale. And so that's been really great to help get our name out there to people who weren't previously aware of us, and know that there are some high performance clean options out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would imagine retail will help, it's hard. I know you have folks who are specialists to help pick colors and things. And it's amazing to me in the world of technology, right? Companies now where you can try on glasses on your computer and, right? Like there have been so many advances to help you figure those things out, but it's still, at the end of the day, not quite the same as doing it in person. So it'll be nice that you'll be able to have that balance between the two.
Absolutely. That's been a missing piece of the puzzle that I've always felt is important. And my hope is whomever this retailer is that we decide to go with, that I can be visiting their main locations and doing master classes. Because when I first started, not a lot of people know this story, but I was actually going into women's homes and I was doing makeovers for them and their friends, usually a group of 5 to 10 women. And essentially, while I would be doing their makeup, someone would come up and sit in my chair and they'd be like, Krysta, I am so embarrassed to tell you this, but I have no idea how to do my makeup. And I would look at them and I'd say, why are you embarrassed? Where do you think you would have learned how to do your makeup? They're like, well, when I was 13, I watched a YouTube video. I'm like, exactly. You wouldn't think that you should know how to do welding by watching a YouTube video and expect yourself to be an expert your entire life. I mean, if you're being trained by odd and end videos, that's not a way to professionally teach anyone. And so I hope that that's comforting as more and more people realize that there shouldn't be this expectation that they know the skill unless they've had formal training in it. And so that's what I've told people. And as I've done their makeup, I've taught them how to do it and which products look good on their skin tone and so forth. And so this was smaller scale. And I could, while it was the most lucrative, I could never scale it because as I hired people to do the same thing I was doing, they didn't want to do it or they didn't have the same success that I did. And so at that time, I didn't realize that it was kind of like direct marketing in a certain way to be getting people to also be doing those parties. And unfortunately in this area, not everyone looks super highly upon that industry. And so we definitely did pivot, but I do remember that was the most impactful. And so now that we move forward into retail, my hope is to be able to do a similar thing, but for more people and at a larger scale to help people realize that they're not alone and most people don't know how to do their makeup.
So fun. That sounds great. And it's exciting. I can hear it in your voice, the excitement about this new avenue. So, along the way, have there been resources you've taken advantage of, organizations or people or things to help you when, you didn't necessarily know how to approach something?
Yes, I owe so many thanks to the accelerator programs that I've been through. My first one was Alpha Loft in Manchester, New Hampshire, and that one was probably the one that was the most near and dear to my heart, primarily because I was just starting. They were the people that took the first bet on me. And I'm still very close to a lot of people from that cohort to this day. And after that, I ended up going through the Babson College's WinLab program, so Women in Innovation. And then after that, I went through Mass Challenge. So I've been through 3 different accelerators, which is not necessarily common for a small business, but I really wanted to get that MBA, I guess you could say, that I didn't already have through real life experiences. And I couldn't be more grateful for those. And so if you're starting up a new business, I would highly, highly suggest that you find a program like this because it puts you in a room with other people who are in the same shoes as you. It gives you a foundation in terms of business knowledge, and it provides you with connections, whether they're mentors or advisors that can help at least open a door or two for you, because it's not always easy to find those opportunities when you're just starting out.
And what about playing off of that advice that you have, for your younger self or for folks not necessarily based upon age, but someone who maybe is ready to step away from something traditional and finally take that leap? Do you have words of wisdom?
So much advice. I would start with number 1 is don't overthink or overplan it. If you're in college and you're doing a business project, they're probably going to have you do, a 20 to 30 page business plan, a SWOT analysis, a whole presentation, plan out all of your costs for manufacturing. And all of this stuff is fantastic and it's good prep work. But what it ends up doing, I think, is the opposite of what it should be doing. And it scares people. It makes people feel more daunted by the process of getting up and going. And what most people don't realize is that you can only prepare so much. The understanding and the overcoming the obstacles is only going to happen once you launch. And so, don't spend all this time getting caught up on the little details of things that you're guessing at this point, and just get something out there and get started. And so I think that that's really helpful, because again, nothing prepares you for a startup like being in one. And then the second thing is, be careful with feeling like you need to raise money really quickly, because you don't always know the best places to utilize those funds. And so when I was going through the first accelerator program, I had people interested in investing. But at that time, I knew it wasn't right for us. And we didn't end up raising money for another year and a half from that point. And I'm very thankful that it worked out in that way, because if I had just taken that money right from the get-go, I could have thought that I should be spending half of it on inventory. But what I wasn't thinking about is, okay, now I have all this product, but how was I going to actually sell the product? So maybe I needed to put more money into like diversified marketing channels. Who knows? The point that I'm making is, it takes time to figure out where those best places are. And if you're bootstrapping, you become very scrappy with your ways, and you try to find little wins. And if you find those little wins first and then you raise money, then you know where to put more money into the places that will be the most effective. Now, if you're a second-time founder, my advice is not that. It would be to raise money as quick as you can, because you already know what will probably be a recipe for success. But if you're a first-time founder, take that time to really bootstrap and learn your business.
Yeah, it's so valuable. I mean, they say, right, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes, I mean, it's experience and trying things and giving things an opportunity to sort of unfold before you can actually figure out what might happen.
Absolutely.
Where do you go for inspiration, whether it's for your business or for new products, or, kind of where you're taking things? What inspires you?
Twitter, believe it or not.
Okay.
I remember when I was in the first accelerator program I went through, everyone seemed to be on Twitter. And I was like, why is everyone on Twitter? Everyone around me is on Facebook and Instagram. And what I didn't realize is that Twitter is a gold mine if you follow the right people. And so I sometimes listen to podcasts, I sometimes read, but I'm not as consistent with those two things as I am with checking Twitter on a daily basis. And this might sound funny, because I just told you, everyone who's listening, to not be on social media all the time. And now I'm telling you to check Twitter every day. But it's very different, because if you follow the right people on Twitter, you're not seeing their highlight reels. I mean, people are barely posting images as is. And so a lot of people are just reporting back on what's working in their business and what isn't. And that can be really helpful as you try to craft your strategies about how to properly move forward. So I'd say I probably learned the most there.
That's great. You don't hear as much about Twitter anymore. I feel like the people who have stuck with it, it's so conversational, and there are such relationships that get built there, because it's kind of a niche thing now. It's not sort of one of the mainstream, bright, flashy, video focused, but still, I mean, to your point, so much value.
It really is. Mm-hmm.
So where can folks find you? Online for now, on social media? What are all the places they need to go to find Aisling?
Yeah, so for me personally, it would be at It's Krysta Lewis. And I'm sure you'll write it in the show notes. But essentially, that's my handle for everything: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, so forth. And then everything Aisling would be Aisling Organics, and same for all the same channels. And then you could always visit our website, which is aislingorganics.com.
Awesome. Well, this has been so great. I think I first heard about you when you went through the Alpha Loft program. And so, long time ago, back in the early 2010s, I think, early teens. But it's been neat to follow your journey, and I'm excited to see where it takes you and where your retail launches and all of those different pieces. But I appreciate you sharing your story today.
Of course. Thank you so much. And I truly am an open book and willing to help anyone listening. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask me questions about what you may or may not be struggling with in business.
Excellent. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, you too.
Krysta has such a neat story, and I loved when she said, nothing prepares you for startups like being in one. They do say that experience is the best teacher. On to the takeaways from today's episode. People need and want to feel heard and supported. You can only prepare so much. At some point, you just have to start and learn as you go. Taking care of ourselves is paramount. Figure out what that means for you and make a commitment to it. And what if we all approached our days as though we couldn't fail? If we put in the time and the effort, we could make whatever we want happen. How might that confidence and mindset change our lives? Thank you so much for listening to this episode of People, Place, and Purpose. Please remember to subscribe, rate, review, and leave a comment. As a new podcast, your support really means a lot. And if you know someone who might be inspired by this story, please share it with them. I would also love to engage with you directly, so please find us on Instagram at People, Place, Purpose. I'm so excited for us to continue to learn and grow and discover new things together, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, it's a beautiful day for an adventure. Get out there and explore.